Bill Ruger's Mini 14 rifle made quite a splash when introduced. It wasn't very long before they adapted it to a cartridge that shooters were clamoring for, and that's the 7.62 by 39.
One of the most successful commercial and recreational shooting firearms in history is the Ruger Mini 14 series of firearms. And this series of firearms was introduced in 1973 to provide a military firearm, a police firearm, and then also a civilian, commercial, recreational firearm. It began with the Select Fire AC-556, and the anatomy of the firearm is familiar. It roughly resembles something in between the M1 rifle and the M1 carbine. It uses the John Garand designed rotating locking bolt. It uses a fixed piston gas system. And in the early version, it was a Select Fire carbine that delivered semi-automatic fire, 3-round burst, and fully automatic fire. Ruger also introduced the Mini 14 as a civilian legal semi-automatic commercial and sporting firearm at about the same time. And its popularity has been, in over 4 decades now, boundless. The firearm was available in the 5.56 by 45 millimeter or .223 Remington cartridge at the outset of production. By the 1980s, though, something interesting was beginning to happen in the Cold War, in that its intensity was beginning to lighten. This same breaking down of ideological Cold War barriers was occurring with China in the 1980s as well, leading to this moment at the end of the Cold War, where suddenly the infamous firearms of the enemy during the Cold War were becoming commercially available in the United States.
American shooters started buying and consuming huge quantities of 7.62 by 39 in SKS rifles, in Norinco rifles coming out of China. And there was a cult following for that cartridge, one that developed very quickly. And Bill Ruger and his engineers decided to tap into that with the Mini 30 rifle. And this gun and cartridge are linked together. The fact that the ammunition was so inexpensive made this an ideal plinking gun. But over time, that 7.62 by 39 has really become as much an American cartridge as a Soviet cartridge. If you go to plants like Hornady or Winchester, you'll see they are loading ammunition specifically for deer hunting. Good expanding bullets. You start seeing brass case 7.62 by 39 and things like American Eagle and Winchester White Box. And these cartridges are affordable, but they also perform. The 7.62 by 39 is a great little cartridge within its performance envelope.
So 1987, you have the Ruger Mini 30. It was well received in the sense that now you had essentially a Mini 14 pattern gun, but one that was in those states and those areas that required it, it was legal for deer hunting because it was a 30 caliber cartridge. And indeed, 7.62 by 39 in its standard loading was at least in the same class as, say, the 30-30 cartridge. So you now had a self-loading 7.62 by 39 firearm that had a good reputation for reliability and could be scoped easily, came with the rings from the factory, and had available 5 and 20 round magazines.
When you look at the Mini 30, you can't necessarily tell it from a Mini 14. You have to look at the hole in the barrel, you have to look at the markings on the receiver heel, and you have to look at the magazine. Ruger had to make some changes, obviously. They had to open up the bolt face. And they also, of course, had to design a new magazine around the 7.62 by 39 cartridge. As it initially introduced in 1987, the Mini 30 had an 18.5-inch barrel, just like the Mini 14. It was 37 3/4 inches long, and it weighed 7 pounds, 3 ounces.
What needs to be understood is that those earlier Mini 30s, the ones produced before the early 1990s, right around 1991 to 1993, were reportedly, in some cases, made with a bore diameter of .308. So they were essentially designed around .308 diameter bullets and projectiles. And at that time, there was a point where American ammunition makers began to load some 7.62x39 ammunition with .308 caliber bullets. Now, the Eastern Bloc 7.62x39 millimeter ammunition coming out of China or Russia was all to that standard, to the normal standard for 7.62x39, which typically was a bullet diameter closer to 311 or even as much as 312 for that chambering. Ruger solved this on those early guns that it chambered in 308 by putting a long lead or a long throat in the chamber. So it was safe to fire that ammunition in those guns, but may or may not have produced the best accuracy. Later, in that transition period after the early 1990s, it went to a standard bore diameter for the 7.62x39, and to this day, Mini 30s are still chambered in that larger bullet diameter. So the Mini 30 came into its own, and in recent years has even been available in a so-called tactical model with a shorter barrel of just over 16 inches rather than the original 18.5 inch barrel. And for those people who just don't, the AK isn't their thing, or the SKS is not quite their cup of tea, the Mini 30 provides them with a traditional style, dependable box magazine fed self-loading rifle in the classic Eastern Bloc 7.62x39 millimeter cartridge, which is a good cartridge and a proven cartridge when kept within its limitations.